Believe it or not, all protocols for cruise lines are not the same, especially when it comes to what happens if you are diagnosed with COVID once on board. Hi there, I'm Ilana from the website lifewellcruise.com. Welcome back to my channel. Now this morning I spent hours researching all of the different mainstream cruise lines, and I looked as well at some of the luxury cruise lines, and what I was looking at was their protocols, their updates, their policies, particularly when it had to do with what happens if you do get diagnosed with COVID-19 before your cruise or during your cruise. And how did those protocols, how did they differ from cruise line to cruise line? Now, I was a little bit surprised to notice that there really are some vast differences from cruise line to cruise line. They are important for you to know. Now, one thing I will say is that all cruise lines have done really an excellent job during this entire, I guess we could call it a restart of cruising, but it's been months now. It's been since the month of June, at least that the majority of cruise lines have really gotten started. And overall, the guest satisfaction rating is very, very high, and the number of COVID cases are very low. However, if you do want some extra assurances, you're really going to want to know the details of what each cruise line provides. Now, as well, there have been some updates to the policies in terms of the vaccines, final payments, and more, and I'll also discuss these policy updates in this video. Whew, that was a long intro, but I do want you to watch the whole thing because we're going to start with some of the very best and we're going to go to some of the, well, least best. Let's put it that way. And I do want to know what you think as well. So please let me know in the comments below. Now, before I get started, I did want to mention that if you like this video, if you find it helpful, informative, or enjoyable in any way, then please do give the video a big thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. And of course, please consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. I would love to have you here within the LifeWell Cruise community. We are almost at 20,000 subscribers and I thank you. Okay, let's get started. So let's look first at Norwegian Cruise Line. Now, some of you are going to be very happy because I'm often told that I don't talk enough about Norwegian Cruise Line, but in this case, I have a lot of good things to say. So first of all, the protocol on Norwegian Cruise Line is that everybody has to be vaccinated, so no children are on board. Now, as they point out on their website, that does mean that right now there is no masks that need to be worn on board. There's no social distancing. They continue to have a self-service buffet. All of their activities continue, their entertainment and their food options. Now, while Norwegian Cruise Line will provide testing upon embarkation, which is a good thing, something very important to note is if you want some of the assurances that will come if you do get denied boarding or if you do get diagnosed with COVID once you're on board the ship, well, there are some assurances, but if you want these, you do need to have your own testing done within a 72-hour period before your cruise. So I do suggest that you do one of the approved home tests before you head to the embarkation port, because if you are diagnosed once on board, then what will happen is Norwegian Cruise Line will cover your medical expenses. They will cover land quarantine if necessary, as well as your transport home. Now, something to note on Norwegian's website is they do point out that if a test is required when you are going to certain destinations, that will be done at the passenger's expense. So definitely something to keep up with, especially we have heard a few things about Bermuda lately. So just keep an eye if you are booked with Norwegian Cruise Lines, keep an eye on that communication from them. Next up, let's look at Royal Caribbean. Now, I have to say, I think Royal Caribbean has done a phenomenal job, not only in their policies, but also in terms of their communication. I personally love every time Richard Fain has a new video out, I'm always looking for his optimistic yet realistic look at where cruising is going. So if you test positive before your cruise, they will refund your cruise. If you test positive during your cruise, you will receive a prorated amount. So for those days that you weren't able to use your cruise or that the cruise was cut short, you'll receive a future cruise credit for those days. Now, if you do test positive once you're on your cruise and you need any medical treatment on board, if you need land-based quarantine at a hotel, for instance, or if you need transport home, they will provide all of that for you free of charge. Now, in terms of the transport back home, they've gone a step further and they've said that they will actually transport you home by private limousine or private jet if needed. Now, I suspect they can do this because they have had so few cases on board, but I certainly do like the assurances. Now, something else to note is that Royal Caribbean changed its final payment policy not that long ago. And if you are booked on a Royal Caribbean cruise, you now can make your final payment up until 30 days before your cruise. So this is something very good. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe they've extended that up until January 2022 cruises. Now, something else to note is if you're flying internationally or you're flying back home to Canada, is Royal Caribbean will provide you with a PCR test if you need one before you disembark. Next up, we have Celebrity. Now, I was actually reading about Celebrity that they've had over 50,000 guests, and out of those 50,000 guests, only 14 have been diagnosed with COVID. So really an excellent track record for their protocols. But Celebrity is very similar to Royal Caribbean in terms of their protocols and their updates and what happens if you do get COVID once on board. So they will cover your medical expenses on board. They will cover your land quarantine if needed, and as well, they will cover any transport home. Now, if your cruise is cut short, you will receive those days back as a future cruise credit, so prorated by the price you paid for that cruise. Now, similar but a little bit different than Royal Caribbean, Celebrity has changed their final payment date from what was 90 days before a cruise to now 60 days before a cruise. Now, do check on your sailing date because this is for a limited amount of time, although you never know when it is extended. Now, if you are flying internationally or to Canada and you do need a test before you disembark from the cruise, they will give you that free of charge on the ship as well. And a little vaccine update in regards to those who have mixed vaccines, Celebrity and Royal Caribbean will now accept as fully vaccinated anybody who has 2 mixed mRNA vaccines. So meaning a Pfizer and a Moderna that are mixed. I believe they have to be a minimum amount of time between the doses of 28 days, if I'm not mistaken. I will screenshot that over here, and that is based on new CDC guidance. So now let's talk about Princess Cruises. Now, Princess Cruises also has really good COVID assurance. So meaning that once you are on the cruise, if you are quarantined, if your cruise is cut short, you will receive a future cruise credit back prorated for those days that you have missed on your cruise. But beyond that, the cruise line will also cover any medical expenses related to COVID that are on board. They'll also cover any land-based quarantine and your transport home. Now, if you do need testing before you disembark from the cruise, Princess has made a little bit of a change. And what they've said is they now will provide testing after the cruise shoreside for anybody that needs it, and they will be covering the cost, so that is something that is very good. But it will be, if you need an antigen test, it will be about a 15-minute process. If you do need a PCR test, they say that results are still very quick, but they are about 60 minutes, and it looks like that will be shoreside rather than on the cruise ship. Now, you could actually have those home tests that you can use to test before your cruise. Well, you can actually have those to use on board, and that can be arranged. However, you do want to check if you're able to use those home tests for international travel. Make sure that your country does accept that type of test to be able to get back into your country and fly home. Now, I have a few more cruise lines to talk about, but before you think, well, they all cover medical treatment on board and land-based quarantine and your travel home, no, they do not. So that's where we're going to continue to go. But Holland America, very similar to Princess, it is covering your medical expenses on board, your land-based quarantine, and your transport home. So that is a good thing. So now let's look at MSC. Now, MSC is working a little bit differently, and what they say is they suggest that you do get their travel insurance, which includes COVID-19 protection. So if you do require medical expenses or land-based quarantine, you can make a claim with that COVID-19 insurance. Now, according to what I see on the website, mixed mRNA vaccines are still not accepted as fully vaccinated on MSC. Something else to note, especially if you're Canadian, is that Canadians are not able to cruise with MSC through the month of October. Okay, so now let's talk about Carnival. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I was going from best to least best. So here we are at Carnival. And Carnival, just something to note is if your cruise is cut short because you've been diagnosed with COVID or you've been quarantined for a certain amount of days, you will receive those days back as a future cruise credit prorated to the amount that you've paid for your cruise. However, if you do get diagnosed with COVID-19 and if you need to be quarantined at a land-based hotel, for instance, they will help to make arrangements. They will help you to arrange your flights home, but the expense is the guest responsibility. Well, future me here, I realized as we were editing that I had forgotten to mention one other thing about Carnival. If you do need testing at the end of your cruise because you're flying home, unfortunately, Carnival will not be able to provide it. Now, something to mention is that Carnival does allow a small amount of exemptions of people that are unvaccinated to be able to board their cruise. It really is a small amount. However, you do need to buy travel insurance, which includes COVID-19 protection. However, I would say on all cruises, but especially on a cruise that is not covering your medical expenses should you be diagnosed positive, that is not covering your land-based quarantine, that is not covering your transport home, I would say if you're cruising with Carnival, having that travel insurance is really a must. Now, I really want to know what you think about these different cruise lines and their differences in policies. But first, let me just let you know that if you are looking at any of those more upscale or luxury brands, including Azamara, Regent, Oceania, they are all covering as well the land-based quarantine, medical expenses on board, and transport home. Now, each cruise line can be a little bit different, so make sure that you do look for yourself, but please let me know what you think. We have heard from cruise lines that they expect to be at 100% capacity on their cruise ships either by the end of this year of 2021 or early in 2022. And more cruise ships are going to be sailing, with most cruise lines saying that they expect to have a full fleet sailing by early in 2022. So do these policies, do these updates, do these protocols make a difference to you as to your booking that you have right now, or maybe what you might look at booking in the future, whether it's those flexible cancellation policies or even the assurances of land-based quarantine or transport home? Are those things that will factor into your decision as to what you book now or in the future? Please let me know in the comments below. Now, I'm also going to leave a video right at the end of this one. It's all about, well, it's more lighthearted. It's about the 3 funniest, strangest, weirdest things that we've ever seen on a cruise. It's a lot of fun, so make sure that you do watch that next. Now, if you did like this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And of course, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye for now. Happy cruising.